Okay, so welcome to everyone. I am Jocelyn Alka. I'm a professor of history and international comparative studies, and I currently serve as the director in the program of gender, sexuality, and feminist studies here at Duke University. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that I am joining you from the unceded tribal territories of several First Nations, including Siouan-speaking Ino, Shakori, and Echushir people, who came to be affiliated with the Occaneechi and Saponi nations, as well as the Iroquois-speaking Tuscarora Nation. Tanya Rispoli is going to put some links in the chat box so you can learn more about the histories, cultures, and current activities of these peoples. Also, please note that this event is equipped with closed captioning. You'll need to turn it on from your individual computer using the accessibility settings in your preferences. Just put something in the chat if you're having any difficulties, and we can try to help you with that. We are also recording this event. So if you are not comfortable being on camera or having your image recorded or anything, just turn off your camera so that you won't be visible in the recording. Today's event forms part of an ongoing international interdisciplinary collaboration on revaluing care in the global economy, which we launched a couple of years ago. The project started from a recognition that we've been talking about the maldistribution of care work for over a century. For at least half a century, there has been a robust body of research and critical thinking across disciplines, including extensive data collection, various metrics and indices, and reams of essays decrying the fact that around the world, care work remains badly undervalued in all senses and falls overwhelmingly to women, particularly racially or ethnically marginalized women. The standard repertoire of solutions, state, market, and technology-based approaches have barely made a dent in the problem, and as we can still see with the failed efforts to pass the Build Back Better legislation, and particularly that it hung up on the question about child care support, even these reforms are a very heavy lift. We launched this project in 2018 to see if we could find ways to open up this question of valuing care, to think about it from new perspectives. And we focus on three principal research areas. First,
you're muted.
I muted myself somehow. Excuse me. So metrics, how we measure care, how it affects care when we try to measure it. Governance, so how laws and policies both foster and reflect normative values of care. And social practices, so how various practices and social formations inform attention to care. We've also started from two fundamental premises that have become even more evident in the current moment. First, that social, cultural, and ecological care are all interdependent and imbricate. And secondly, that innovative solutions to the so-called crisis of care can be found in many corners of the world, particularly those that have been most suspicious of the standard repertoire of solutions. Today's event, Digital Feminisms Between Archives and Networks, is the fourth in a series on visualizing care, a project that stems not only from the long-standing feminist efforts to make visible the time, labor, attention, and expertise required for care, but also from a discomfort with our own efforts to represent care without reinscribing naturalized and commonsensical conceptions of what constitutes care and what care implies. Working with several members of our group here, we decided to turn to artists to help us defamiliarize our understanding of care and to help us develop new sensory and lexical vocabularies for representing care. Each event in this series, including today's, also includes an online exhibit that can be accessed through the link that Tanya is going to put in the chat. The exhibit will come down on March 4th, but we will have more events later this year, including a final conference, Visualizing Care, Infrastructures, and Imaginaries, that will take place May 13th and 14th. It will also be a virtual conference. I'm using a conference platform. If you're not already on our mailing list, please feel free to drop your email address in the chat and we'll add you to the list. The Revaluing Care and the Global Economy Project has enjoyed broad support at Duke, for which we are immensely grateful. We particularly want to thank the Program in Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies and the Mellon-funded Humanities Unbounded program, which has not only supported the Revaluing Care and the Global Economy Lab, but was also open to allowing us to reorient the lab toward this Visualizing Care series. Today's event has also received support from Duke's Vast Connections program, as well as CMAC, Computational Media, Arts, and Cultures here at Duke. GSF and Humanities Unbounded, as well as these other programs, are not, of course, simply offices, but rather people who do all the work to make these events possible. And I particularly want to thank the artist Lauren Henschel, feminist theorist Tanya Rispoli, and GSF program coordinator Julie Winmore. Tanya is in fact the intellectual author of today's event and its principal organizer, which draws largely on her own work on digital technologies and feminist activism. So without further ado, I am going to turn things over to Tanya, who will introduce today's speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for this introduction, and welcome everyone to Digital Feminisms Between Archives and Networks. Today's event will focus on the question of how we can produce and reproduce care through internet, data, and artificial intelligence. We know that since the emergence of Web 1.0 in the 90s, several feminist theorists and practitioners have reflected on the possibility of repurposing technologies to build virtual interconnected communities. For many years, the term network has been even the material metaphor to describe social movements' ability to organize themselves from below. However, with the progressive process of enclosure of IT platforms, these possibilities seem dramatically reduced. So the aim of today's exhibition, and I welcome you to explore the exhibition in the link I'm putting in the chat, to which the artists and designers and researchers, Kelsey Broad, Brittany Green, Kate Alexandride, Mindy, Caroline Sinders, Ellie Rutherford, Sara Suárez, and Alice Yuan Zhang, the co-founders of the Virtual Care Lab, contributed. And also this panel's aims is to see how even within today's technological settings, it would be possible to build a feminist citational politics and design new tools, new imaginaries and infrastructures for rethinking queer and anti-racist digital feminisms. Without further ado, I want to turn the floor to Mindy, and I will now introduce all our speakers and moderators for today. Mindy is a designer and researcher. She is an assistant professor at Rutgers Mason Gross School of the Arts and critic at Yale School of Art. As a fellow at the Harvard Law School's Berkman Klein Center for the Internet and Society, she began the Digital Cyberfeminism Index, which was later commissioned by Rhizome and presented at the New Museum. Cyberfeminism Index is a database of hundreds of examples of online activism. The printed publication of its catalog is a 2021 recipient of the Graham Foundation grant, and it will be published in the fall 2022. Caroline Sinders is a critical designer, researcher and artist. For the past few years, she has been examining the intersections of artificial intelligence, intersectional justice, system design, harm, and politics in digital conversational spaces and technology platforms. She worked with the Tate Exchange at the Tate Modern, the United Nations Arts Electronica's AI Lab, the Harvard Kennedy School, and many others. Alice Vanzang is an artist, designer, and program organizer. Her projects often take on a playful and collaborative approach, using mixed reality technologies to invite public empathy into ecological and social futuring. Alice holds a BS in Business Administration from University of California, Berkeley, and is influenced by object-oriented ontology, interspecies collaborations, Eastern philosophy, and magical realism. Sara Suarez is a filmmaker, artist, and creative organizer, interested in how sensory perception, consciousness, and visuality shape our relationship to history and landscape. Her experimental film and sound work has appeared in many venues, such as LA Film Forum, Slam Dance, and many others. Her current project studies darkness, dreaming, and autonomy. And you can find more about Alice and Sarah's own work in the link I'm putting in the chat. Alice and Sara are co-organizers of the Virtual Care Lab, that is an assemblage of creative practitioners experimenting with remote togetherness. Since early 2020, they hosted dozens of public gatherings, focused discussions, participatory performances, active exchanges, and quiet portals across platforms and disciplines. Finally, please join me in welcoming also our fantastic today's moderators, who are Dr. Nicki Washington, Professor of Practice of Computer Science and Gender, Sexuality and Feminist Studies here at Duke University, and also author of Unapologetically Dope, Lessons for Black Women and Girls on Surviving and Thriving in the Tech Field. She is currently director of the Cultural Competence in Computing Fellows program and the NSF-funded Alliance for Identity Inclusive Computing Education. Her career in higher education began at Howard University as the first Black female faculty member in the Department of Computer Science. Her professional experience also includes Winthrop University, the Aerospace Corporation, and IBM. She is the graduate of Johnson Smith University and North Carolina State University, becoming the first Black woman to earn a PhD in computer science at the university and the 2019 Computer Science Hall of Fame inductee. Victoria Szabo is a research professor of visual and media studies in the Department of Art, Art History and Visual Studies at Duke. She's also secondary faculty in Gender, Sexuality and Feminist Studies, director of graduate studies of the Computational Media Arts and Cultures program. And she leads also the Digital Humanities Initiative at FHI, as well as the Information Science and Studies program and labs. Her work focuses on theories and practices of digital humanities and computational media in relation to art, history, archives, culture, and memory. She's also chair of ACM SIGGRAPH Digital Arts Community, a group that brings together computer scientists, artists, and designers from all around the world. And you can find out more about Victoria in her personal link from Scholars Duke. So without further ado, I would like to turn first to Mindy and then to Caroline and finally to the Virtual Care Lab. I would ask them to guide us in a short presentation through their works, highlighting how we could reproduce care through technological tools, databases, bots, websites, and visual arts in general. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you so much, Tanya and Jocelyn, for the larger introduction. I wanted to screen share. This will be, I'm going to put a link in the chat right now. So this is part of a larger presentation, but I'm going to truncate it so it'll be roughly 5 minutes, and I'll keep a close eye on the time so we have plenty of time for discussion later. Let's see. All right. You should be seeing my screen. Girls need modems. A gender changer figures out how her computer works, and she is not afraid of taking it apart. This glitch is a correction to the machine. So what you're seeing here is a draft catalog printed a couple years ago for the first version of the Cyberfeminism Index. This was only about 10 copies for publishers as a proof of concept. And as Tanya mentioned, the upcoming book will be published in fall 2022 with Inventory Press. One of the ideas for the book was to really figure out how to create a compendium of 30 years of online activism internationally. So I'm going to, again, scrub through this just for the sake of time. But in the center, you see that what we're calling the index with an indexical spine. And this is trying to visualize all the different citations and cross-references throughout these books. Not to spearhead a single voice, but to really showcase a multiplicity of voices and opinions, because there are no clear definitions for cyberfeminism, though I will try to give one at the end of this video. The beginning of the book includes artifacts. These are these low-res screenshots, stills, and GIFs that are otherwise flattened when archiving different websites. So an example of this, let's see if it flips to it, is the mini gender changer. This was a logo for a hackerspace called the Gender Changers Academy based in the Netherlands in the late 90s. And it's a key example of how these binary gendered norms are kind of built into the hardware and software that we use. So think about a male port or a male extension and a female port, for example. And then the latter half of the book includes these full bleed screenshots. And the book ends with this sticker, cyberfeminism. So this is actually a little sticker from the Old Boys Network, a collective from the 90s with Cornelia Solfrank. And for them, instead of trying to define what cyberfeminism was, they gave 100 definitions as to what it was not. I think when I'm asked what cyberfeminism might include, I find it helpful to unpack the parts of the word itself. So cyber, this prefix, emerged in the 1940s for Norbert Wiener's cybernetics. And then it was later attached to space to become cyberspace in William Gibson's Neuromancer, this science fiction novel about networked sensory haptic environments, similar to what people are talking about now with Web3 and Metaverse. But while important for many reasons, Gibson's Neuromancer was very much characterized by cyber babes and fembots. So when cyber was finally fixed to feminism in 1991, people were trying to question or treating this word as a provocation. How could women and other marginalized communities kind of reimagine what this techno-utopia or techno-future might look like? I'm gonna scrub through this. So as we are thinking about the structure for a second translation of this project, the cyberfeminismindex.com, we are really trying to think about how we visualize citations and how we could future-proof websites. So this was the 100 antitheses manifesto that I described earlier. And when you look at this now, it still works quite perfectly because they were using a lot of these backbones that are fundamental to the web, default HTML elements, system fonts, things of this nature. So with my collaborator, Angeline Meitzler, we built cyberfeminismindex.com. And as you're moving through the site and clicking different drawers, your selections are added to this side panel, which we call a trail, to kind of capture all the different things that you're reading about and intuitively collecting. And these are then downloadable as this PDF. And generally, I'm pretty pro piracy in some forms. But to kind of close out this very brief overview, I wanted to give some more concrete example of entries that were included inside the book. What I like about showing in the browser is that it's essentially a page viewer, and a lot of these things are open source. This HTML comments as lecture format was very much inspired by a talk by Emma Ray Brummel called Handmade Web for the School for Poetic Computation. You can view her comments at this link. But if I scrub to the bottom, I'll just quickly read some quotes so you can hear from the women themselves how they describe these projects. I'll just read two of them for the sake of time. This is Bindi Girl by Prema Murthy, 1999. Bindi is my avatar. Not only is she her alias in the virtual world, but a play on the word, which in India means an incarnation of a Hindu deity, the embodiment of an archetype. In this case, she is the embodiment of the goddess whore archetype, which has historically been used to simplify the identity of women and their roles of power in society. Bindi is neither here nor there, but exists in screenal space. She is somewhere between a question and an answer. And this was an artifact from the website Dark Core by Gash Girl in 1993. Stop fingering my separating holes, extending my oozing boundary. But in cipher space, there are no bounds, or so they say. But in spiral space, there is no they, there is only us. Thank you so much. I'll hand it back to Tanya.
Thank you so much, Mindy. I would turn to Caroline, and I will share the screen of her fantastic care bot.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Tanya, for, I guess, being in charge of CareBot right now. I guess let me know when people can see it. Great, awesome. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really honored to be in conversation with all of you, and I'm excited to talk about a project of mine called CareBot. CareBot was built in December 2019 for a residency with my collaborator, Alex Fafigea of Camusi Labs. And originally this chatbot was designed as a critical design piece. It's something that should really not exist, but it does to fulfill this kind of missing infrastructure inside of large technology platforms, one in which when people are facing harassment, there's often little resources given to them, but also there's not necessarily anyone there to sort of walk through or explain what is happening. Effectively, there is no care. There is no place of care when someone is facing this. And this came out of a variety of different avenues that I was thinking of. It's inspired by a project of mine called Social Media Breakup Coordinator, which was started in 2015. And that's a performance art piece that explores the very intertwined interconnections of our online and offline lives. It's gone through 3 iterations since then, with this being the most recent one. And it was inspired by the fact that as users of social media, we live our most beautiful and angry and complex and complicated lives online in a very interconnected space. And this project came out of an idea of wondering what would it be like to guide someone through the processes of encountering any kind of sort of emotional interaction. These could be awkward interactions, these could be scary interactions, these could be heartbreaking interactions. Like an algorithm, I started creating different solutions that could be combined for a variety of different kinds of situations, potentially following a one-night stand or a best friend breakup or ghosting or ending an abusive relationship, or just having potentially that one coworker you don't really talk to very often friending you on something like Instagram. And it slowly evolved into this. It's important for me probably to pause and highlight that I am a human rights researcher as well as an artist and designer. And I've spent the past 8 years studying online harassment and online gender-based violence, as well as white supremacy. So some of the work that I do is with a variety of different entities like Amnesty International. And one of the, at least once a month, someone contacts me facing online harassment and they're not sure what to do. And what they need is someone to help guide them through a process and also provide a space of care and of listening when facing something that can be very emotionally traumatizing and triggering. And this is where CareBot came from. But you'll see in the bot that it says it shouldn't exist, but it does to fulfill this void created by the platform, that the help and feedback the bot is providing should actually be handled by real people and trained professionals on these platforms, but that doesn't exist. And until that kind of help infrastructure exists, the bot will exist. And my work likes to play with these tensions while highlighting how to create useful forms and interventions of design while highlighting deeper issues at play. And I'm excited to get in conversation, talk about should this kind of care be relied upon, for example, inside of social networks? And I'm really torn in how to answer that. Because on one hand, I believe that these very massive platforms should be held responsible for the different kinds of harms that they wrought on society, but seeing in which how they currently respond to harms, thinking if they were to set up some kind of space for care for victims, there is a worry that they would mishandle this would be misaligned, that could actually cause further harm. And so part of this project, I think, is partially to sort of deal with that tension and talk about, well, who actually cleans up and cares for the harm that exists inside of these systems, and who then should be the ones to respond, and how does that sort of burden and duty of care get shared? After making this, what was interesting is someone approached me and said, well, wouldn't that be a really great startup idea that we could make a bot to respond to victims of online harassment. And I said, well, actually, what a terrible idea. How awful that could be if this were to potentially go wrong. And the point of this project is actually to never improve this bot, that in fact, it should sort of exist in a way as maybe a sign of this era of techno-solutionism that we exist in. And in fact, this sort of immediate knee-jerk reaction to automate care. And that is what the call for the residency was on, that this was built under, automating care for academy/solitude. And that's, I think, a tension I would really like to talk about when we're engaging in conversation. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That was a really great presentation of your project. Now I will turn to Sara and Alice, and they will present together their virtual care lab project, of which they are co-founder with many other people.
Thanks, Tanya. I'll share our screen and give everyone a quick walkthrough of our website, and just describe a little bit about where we started. So Alice and I co-created Virtual Care Lab in 2020, when it, I think, became pretty obvious to everyone that there was a dearth of, creative, caring online spaces for people to be in with each other. Let's share this screen. And we just basically started without a real solid plan. This is our website. Just wanted to get as many people together to do pretty much any kind of creative activity you could come up with. So one thing we did just right from the beginning is we put a form on our website for anybody to send in ideas. It might not be loading. Oh, here it is. Anyone can send in ideas to do things with other people on the internet. And we were, interested in kind of interrogating things like presence and care together online. So what we ended up doing was a massive amount of different gatherings in virtual space across all sorts of different, formats and structures. We've had listening parties, performances, sound walks that go outside, with everybody's different countries and things like that, which is kind of lovely. We've got an archive that we should probably get to updating sometime soon, with different, relics of what we did with everybody. And we made a Discord channel as well for people to kind of stay in touch and communicate and share thoughts and ideas together. So Alice, do you want to add?
Yeah, so since the beginning, one of the rituals that has really stayed was we decided to have a weekly time called Lab Hour. No agenda to it besides the fact that we are going to show up for each other. And it was this little pocket of stability in the mediated networks where we more and more so existed under lockdown. And so every Sunday we would meet up, and at the beginning it was quite small, and then sometimes even now it's quite small, a few people showing up, but then eventually over time we started really feeling a sense of solidarity that came out of that, and a lot of really interesting conversations. It became, it was a free form ideation or check-in time that we had, and people brought in a lot of, what they were feeling while they were moving through the internet or through their daily lives in their various localities, and we were kind of exchanging notes and really just through practice of showing up with each other, seeing what was happening, and then some of the ideas that were brought up, or the questions that were brought up in those spaces, also then developed into various projects that Sarah is showing here. And then we'd like to show also the portals, if you want to navigate over to that. So on the exhibition page, you'll see a video of this too. But the portals project is, so, the gatherings, some of these that we've hosted, they are synchronous. They are either on Zoom or maybe on Discord, or a sound walk that we do together at the same time. But we were also kind of really just trying to notice what are the different ways that people could you know, find a sense of connection or intimacy or solidarity with each other as a sort of ad hoc care infrastructure without necessarily defaulting to, you know, what was offered at the time. And so the Portals project was a way that we might be able to leave notes for each other and find more asynchronous or slower moments of connection. And some of these use, you know, more open source or kind of tools that people have come up with, even during the pandemic, and others might use something like Google Sheets or some of the more dominant tools that we might be familiar with. And so in the spirit of also what Caroline was suggesting in terms of, you know, our conversations to come today, it would be really lovely to chat a little bit about what it means to be engaging in our contemporary, monoculture of digital tools, as well as kind of what are the cracks in between, and how can we kind of lead toward alternatives, and what does care mean in our strategies across navigating all of that. What else? Terms?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of projects that have been pretty, more involved or more thoughtful, and just kind of involved a larger group of people like working together to create something rather than just, a gathering or, meeting in virtual space. So one I think we should show is our portal for Jose Miguel. So this was a really fun, interesting project where somebody who came to Virtual Care Lab, who is an immigration lawyer, basically said, I have this client who is in detention, and he's incarcerated in Adelanto detention center, and he's a creative person who loves to write poetry and rap lyrics, and just really more than anything else wants a way to connect with people, because it's incredibly inhumane and depressing. So we just figured out, like, what would it take to create some way for Jose Miguel to share his lyrics and poetry online from prison, right? Essentially, and there we came up against so many different technological restrictions and constraints too. We ended up having to sort of patch him into Zoom calls through Daniela's phone in this way that, she could talk to him because she's his lawyer, but he can't talk to anybody else. Extremely restrictive. So we ended up, I think, mailing back packets of writing and scanning them and translating them and putting them here, and then actually did several gatherings on Zoom for people to just explore this music together and kind of understand this situation. And so, like, you can actually go and I don't know if people can hear. Yeah, like, we have all these recordings of Jose Miguel actually reciting his lyrics and things, and it became a very connective way to, I think, explore some of the things that we might not consider when we're thinking about how care or how solidarity or community work in virtual space, where there are just people who are completely erased from this landscape. Alice, what would you like to add about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a process. The process itself was really, interesting for all of us, because it wasn't very curated or singularly directed, or part of this, we're not an institution or even a collective, really. It's quite open, of an assemblage of folks that are at Virtual Care Labs, much more of a meeting place. And so when this ask came in, folks kind of just coalesced like white blood cells. And so people were like, hey, I can translate this, or I can contribute in this way. I can, Bava created the website for this and really helped lead some of the development of the project. And so this is generally the spirit that that we've been witnessing and that we really also encourage in the way that Virtual Care Lab comes to be. And so, yeah, going forward, we're currently in a process of distributing our governance even more. And so we're thinking about what it even means to hold space together online. And so the Terms Project is something else that has really been a bit of an anchor in that, because the more that folks find us and that we're having these conversations together and people like more and more ideas, and it's helpful to like Mindy mentioned, unpack some of the words that lead people here, and to understand and bring criticality into some of the things that are kind of floating by, like community, like commenting, or like care even, and user technology, all of this, and just like bring and the moment that we ask, what does this really mean, and we actually open the floor up to all of these terms. We've had like co-writing sessions on this, and really just a lot of conversations together about like what we're doing here, and what would it's kind of a moment of seeding then some intentions, and opening up what folks would really like to imagine for what if the internet was on our own terms.
This is the outcome of a micro residency that we had done earlier last year, exploring spatial and access intimacy in digital spaces. So that's like really also where, I think the provocation behind like why we started writing these terms. But as Alice was alluding to, they're becoming a very interesting and useful framework to turn back on as we develop our practice. And we are definitely seeing it as a living document to which we're planning to add some new terms. We actually, to Alice, to your point earlier about how so many people get involved, we actually decided to do this work in an unconventional open residency research kind of structure we made up, and basically said, if you're, anybody who is finding this, if you want to participate in helping write this or helping talk about this, come meet with us, be part of this. It was a messy process, but one that ended up including a lot of different voices that I think we wouldn't have heard from otherwise.
Yeah, and that's Virtual Care Lab. We're still in the mess.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Sarah, Alice, Mindy, and Caroline. This was great. I'm sure we're going to have a wealth of questions. So this is just a reminder to everyone. If you have questions, please place them in the chat. We would love to incorporate them into this part of the discussion. We have plenty of time, so please feel free to share your thoughts. And with that, I want to also turn it over to my co-pilot, Victoria, who will lead us off with a few questions as well.
Thanks so much to Nicki and to all of the presenters. As you know, we have this huge range of things we were already thinking we'd ask you, and now I have even more things I want to ask. So maybe just to start off, and while the audience is thinking about how they want to frame their questions, I'm struck by, in all of your cases, there's kind of a bespoke, handmade, sometimes retro chic way of doing the work that you're doing, that maybe harkens back to an earlier, more idealistic idea of what the internet is or could be. And yet we are also facing so many new technologies, new systems that seem really, massive, of course, with the growth of AI, with the metaverse, with increasingly corporatized systems. How do you relate yourselves and the work you're doing to those massive other forces? How do you position yourself, and when do you engage and not to engage? And this is really for everybody, so anybody who would like to start. Thank you.
I can jump in if that's easier. I guess for me, I sit in two spaces that do very often overlap, which is like art and then like human rights and design and technology work. And so for me, it really depends at the moment, I guess, what hat I'm wearing. I feel like as a human rights researcher, and right now I'm currently working in the UK's Information Commissioner's Office. That's like the UK's version of the FTC, looking at things like dark patterns. And so this is my first time really engaging on the role of like the regulatory side. For me, it feels working in human rights that I have to, it is a duty of care to engage with major platforms publicly and privately. So there are times when I'm wearing my human rights hat, I've been inside of spaces like Facebook and am, you know, running workshops, trying to teach their various teams about, well, what is intersectionality inside of design? What, how do you think about human rights from a design perspective? And also, how does that relate directly to the products that they're creating? If they listen to that is another sort of thing entirely, but I think it's important in that space to constantly be working with them. But that also means that there are like many different levers I have access to in terms of, I think, critiquing them. Another lever is writing a series of public facing journalism articles, right? Another lever is writing a CSO style white paper. Another lever is CareBot, is making these things and sort of directly sort of calling out this kind of like techno solutionism that is very much, you know, ingrained in the DNA of these really large scale platforms. So I think for me, I'm approaching it probably in a different way than other people, but I always want to be really upfront about that as much as I am an artist, I also am working in human rights as a researcher and designer. And I feel like one has to engage with them. But that also means I get to work in a variety of other ways right now with a regulatory body of really thinking about sort of these greater impacts directly in relationship to policy. So that's the way I kind of approach it. But generally, I think a multi-pronged approach is needed. We need art as much as we need, you know, academic investigation and research, as much as we need like journalism, like the markup, really trying to hold, you know, trying to take again all these different levers to hold these systems really accountable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to build off of what Caroline's saying, I also agree that these two spaces are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I think that even if my project right now is kind of focusing on like this revisionist internet history, it's not really in the attempt of ancestral worship or claiming that Web 1.0 was better. There's like this super blogger named Venkatesh Rao who talks about the turn towards the domestic cozy, which is how a lot of these born digital users or web people now are trying to actually build more intimate, seemingly local online networks, because they've learned through use that these bigger platforms don't feel as intimate and caring and et cetera as these smaller, more peer-to-peer networks might be. So as this even points to things like the metaverse, ideas of the metaverse have existed since the 80s and earlier. The technology now has gotten much better. And I think that when artists or other creative people are able to conceive of these spaces in alternative ways, it actually does lead to the evolution of what is currently there. I think the dangers of what's happening now is these imaginings of this like sensory networked environments are very much being spearheaded by big platform oligopolies like Facebook or Meta, which means that the principles built into Meta will then be built into the metaverse. So I actually think it's essential for artists to continue to think about what these online environments might look like as a way to kind of subvert what's possible in the infrastructure being created now.
Yeah, so from the virtual care lab perspective, we're definitely carrying some of the more scrappy aesthetics there, not just in the visuals of things like, you know, the portal page or how the website looks like, but as well as the way that we engage with each other overall, and really embracing glitches and like lossiness and really noticing like somatics and the body and other signals of how we then communicate with each other. And I think through all of that, our philosophy so far has been to really just empower each other. I mean, a lot of the, you know, the folks that have gotten involved with Virtual Care Lab are not necessarily tech savvy, or not necessarily there to, you know, make tools and or think about technology in this traditional way. But are creatives of various different disciplines, and so we found it really important for us to empower each other to really find a sense of agency in the way that we even communicate through and about the environments, the mediated environments that we have. And I think we'll dig more into that as we think about distributed governance, and I think the aesthetics might even follow in thinking about what actually might just be the most accessible ways and the most potentially low-tech ways, or as well as there's someone, so we're representing Virtual Care Lab here, but as just two people of this larger assemblage, and we've learned a lot from other folks that have really come through the space. Someone who has really also been very much part of the co-organizing. His name is Kenny Zhao, and Kenny has talked about in various lab hours, being a bridge and really being the space of criticality, where we can kind of look at some of the spaces that are dominant, that are actually actively sedating in the way that they design behaviors in these spaces, and how we might be able to subvert that or critique that, or how we even just check in with how we feel, and so that, and we can think about alternatives together. So. Sarah, you're on mute.
I just realized I was muted. All I would add to that is just, how important language has been for us too. And I think that you kind of see that in our terms project, but really the way that these tools can be discussed, right, by people who are working on it and researching them in these different spaces, it's very intimidating to someone who isn't maybe consider themselves a high-tech person, right, or really deeply enmeshed in this world, and yet it touches all of us, and it, fundamentally reshapes our human relationships and our social and emotional experiences together. And so, like, so much of our aesthetic and the language that we end up using is about not scaring people off too, or not making people feel like they can't speak. We have a lot of mechanisms in place too, like the lab hour, right, which is just an open zone. It's like having an office hours or open studio, where it really is just show up any way you can. You don't need to know anything. You don't need to know anyone who's there or be invited. So I think something we've come to realize too is just how important it is to keep reminding people that we do want you here and we want to hear from you, especially when there are people alongside each other, when people are joining our Discord and introducing themselves. You see everything from like, hi, I'm like a PhD and I'm researching such and such issue and I'm interested in these different topics, and like that's really great to see. And then there's also the people who are kind of like, hi, I think I'm an artist and I'm here. And like, that's great, because those people also learn from each other in this way that we try to keep that equal and not have it be like this person's an expert in this, or like these are the people who get to make certain decisions or guide certain ways of thinking or speaking, and just have everything be really, really equal that way.
Mm-hmm. So thanks. Fantastic answers. And again, I'm going off in a direction I didn't anticipate to ask this question based on what you said. For all of you, given the weight of care, given the need that you're seeing, and the strategies that you're taking to remain in spaces of intimacy and collaboration, how do you scale up, or do you let go of that and think instead about being a model or an instance or a node, or what are the different ways that you conceptualize the work that you're doing? And again, this is for all of you. So as you address or confront that fact of the vastness of the need and the drop in the ocean feeling that can sometimes come from doing the work that you're doing.
I mean, I can chime in to just quickly cite a writer that I reference quite often. So Adrienne Marie Brown, organizer and activist based in Detroit, often talks about fractalism. And I think we have, even in Anna Singh's conception of scalability or her critique of it, it's this idea that in order to scale, things cannot change. It's almost like a SVG or a vector where it scales infinitely, but without any conformity or only conformity. And I think Brown's conception of fractalism is important because by creating different intimacies or communities at a very local level, that kind of framework can scale in a kind of a spiraling way, but changes depending on who it needs to respond to and how many people it needs to engage with. So I like this idea of scalability, scaling, but embracing difference rather than scaling and trying to be as conforming as possible.
Right, thank you.
This is something that we're learning how to do now.
Yeah.
For a while, Alice and I have really held a lot of the responsibility of, things being posted on the website or, kind of when gatherings happen. And it's been an ongoing project of ours to really spread that knowledge and say like, hey, anybody can like really shape this in an operational way and have access to the email account and like have access to these things, right? That was, I think our attitude has always been less about like, oh, we don't trust certain people to mess with this, or we don't want more like voices being involved, but really just like, oh, it just takes a lot of work to pass on that knowledge to people and to also, I think, reckon with having this be a completely like, nobody makes money. It's like an all volunteer kind of zone and project, which is a really wonderful equalizing force in many ways, but I think also makes it difficult for people to ask for help sometimes. And so that's just something that we've been learning, but I think with the attitude of like, one, as more people join this space and as we see in terms of like everyone's, the weight that we're carrying, right, of that care, making sure that different work people contribute are valued so that it's not stratified into something like intellectual work versus, say, marketing work, right? Which is like a really common way to divide those things. But to just reinforce the attitude that everybody's contributing something. And then also to really just double down on how we understand and communicate about some of our most core values together too, because as more people get involved, it's like there are only so many times, I think, across the network of people who are participating in the space that we can like be there in a moment when someone's questioning like, oh, how do we do this certain thing? Or what does this value mean to us, right? And so it's like, how do we ripple those like understandings as an active practice to the other people who are then taking on like helping shape things? Maybe not the most eloquent way to phrase all of that. Alice, do you want to add?
I mean, I think as Web3 developments roll in and folks are kind of carrying some of those questions into the virtual care lab space, and also as virtual care lab has really grown over the, like, just by numbers in terms of people hopping into the Discord or engaging over the past 2 years, we've been confronting like the question of, do we need to have a technological solution for the way that we govern at scale? And I think, based on the philosophies that we've really been trying to ground in our collective practice in, it's a contentious, ongoing conversation for us. But I think the core of it is that we don't want to be outsourcing this to a technological solution. And inherently, as we distribute our governance, we're just having lots of conversations with each other. And we're really trying to take time to build trust with each other and understand that there are some things that, cannot be necessarily decentralized in like a technological way as it's kind of advertised in our current environment. And so it's really people work at the end of the day for us, and acknowledging now that we're opening some of that up more and more, I think folks are kind of taking a look under the hood of what it means to be even playing host with each other and holding the space and acknowledging that as labor with each other.
Thank you. Caroline, do you want to add anything here? I know this is already part of
No, totally. I think just to sort of echo, I feel very similarly. I mean, one of the things that really guides a lot of my work is I want to move at the speed of trauma and also trust. And what that really means is having to move really, really slowly. And like a kind of joke I hear a lot in CSO space. It's not so much a joke, it's a call to action, which is like move slowly and be nice to people, as opposed to move fast and break things. But, you know, that then sort of challenges the way we think of what scale is. And if I think in a very practical way of advice I've given to sort of different tech workers, for example, of how do they fix this problem they're encountering, the problem is often like you need more people that work for you. Like you need more people to respond to this, because we're having like a lot of the issues are generated by people, right? Maybe intentionally or unintentionally. And then the response cannot be necessarily build a better tech system that creates so many more issues. So I think really one of the things I sort of strive to do is rethink, well, what do solutions look like in terms of scale? So anti-scale is a form of scale. I've been reading and rereading a lot Alex Hanna's paper on scale recently, but I think the ways in which we can rethink what solutions look like, and also what should infrastructure also look like, a lot of it needs to be human powered. And I think we can see this and where mutual aid groups have popped up during COVID-19, but I think also across, you know, all of our work on this panel, for example. But I think for me, a lot of the solutions, a lot of the ways of thinking and building and moving forward, it's less how do we make a tool and much more like how do we build communities and then build spaces that allow for human labor to be involved in this, and how do we think of this as a form of scale and in fact the best kind of technology. And I mean, at least when I think also directly back to CareBot, for example, like that really shouldn't be in place or in lieu of a security trainer, or in lieu of a therapist, or in lieu of someone that can just help empathize with the person experiencing the harm they're experiencing, of someone else saying, you know, I know what this is like. What you're feeling is normal, sadly, like this is a thing that happens, you are not alone. And that's a lot of the care I end up providing when I talk to people about this. But there shouldn't be a way to scale me up by automating that. Like maybe it really does need to be this kind of one-to-one engagement, and that shouldn't be replaced. So maybe this is the optimal scale, and how do we sort of rethink and change the ways in which we think about that kind of efficiency, if you will, and actually recenter that in, you know, the design of our interactions with one another.
Thank you for that, Caroline. That was a really good point. All of you mentioned, and it bubbles to the top, this idea of intention, which is so lacking in the tech space. And we see it so much even in the academic space, because we teach students to fail fast, fail often, figure it out later. And I want to go back to something, Caroline, that you just touched on with Alex Hanna's work. Specifically because Alex just posted a recent blog around racialized tech experiences and how the industry itself is rooted still in a lot of racism. And so using that under the lens of CareBot, there's a statement that you have on the website that talks about these systems are broken and it's not the user's fault. And I want to get your thoughts on, one, this idea of, is it really broken, or is it really working the way it's supposed to, especially given Alex's recent post and her transition from a company like Google to the DARE Institute, knowing that computing is dominated by primarily cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, middle to upper class white and Asian men. Is it safe for us to argue and fair that everything we're seeing is a feature and not a bug?
Totally. I mean, this is a very beautiful question, and it really highlights the complexities which cannot be expressed right in the automated nature of CareBot. And I like the last part of your sort of question as well, because this is something I say a lot, which is it's a feature, not a bug, until you fix it. But one of the reasons CareBot does say this is one of the things I've noticed with people when they're facing harassment, regardless of technical background or like expertise background or knowledge background, that people feel either embarrassed or ashamed that they are affected by the harassment that they're facing, that they know harassment occurs online and that it shouldn't bother them. it should bother you when someone says something really harmful to you. Like that's a normal human reaction to feel alarm or fear or anger or just sadness. Like those are normal reactions. So part of why CareBot says that is partially for the person experiencing harassment, that it's not their fault, that like they didn't do anything to cause that harm, that it is in fact, we could argue, the design of Facebook or Twitter or any social media platform, that if you face harm, that's part of the design, right? It's intrinsic to it because you're experiencing it and there's not a way for you to really augment it very well. A lot of the conversations, if we get into like design around mitigating online harassment, it's always starting with mitigation. Prevention is a much harder thing. And we could go down a rabbit hole around what prevention could look like, but also then the problems of, again, if Zuckerberg is the one designing that prevention, right? That raises a lot of alarm bells. So I do think, and I agree a lot with you, that these systems are performing exactly the way they should. But I also think too, and the way that which a lot of the writing came out of CareBot is a lot of the things I say to actual people when they're experiencing harassment, that's not their fault, that this does happen, that it's actually the fault of the system, that there's nothing they did wrong, that like, you know, well, if you had just done this one thing, you wouldn't be experiencing that. That's not the reality, actually, when you face harassment. There's often nothing you really can do. It's not the fault of your action. And I think that that's important in a way to think about the language we say to those experiencing harm in the moment. And then also the way to sort of zoom out. And this panel is a good way to do that and say, well, you know, it is actually functioning the way it was designed. It was designed by those in extreme spaces of privilege who are often cis men who don't face harassment. We would be on a very different internet if it was designed by Black women, by trans people, right? It'd be very different looking. And that, I think, is a sort of fantastic thing to think about. What should that look like? What could it look like? So we are in the way that it should function, but it's causing this really intense harm. And I think it's important to acknowledge to those facing harm that what that harm means to them, to like hold space for it, and also say that like it is not their fault. And you know, this then harkens back to many other conversations around sexual harassment, sexual harm, and sort of the judgment around those experiencing it. But also with all of that, you know, really being said, I think it's important to then think about, well, what can one sort of do in those environments, and what can we do to also critique those systems, and what are varying forms of safety that should arise in those systems. But I think those are different conversations, right, that happen at different times. Like a CareBot, perhaps about the harm and not responding to those being harmed, would be designed conversationally in a very, very different way, right? Because it would be engaging in a sort of different mode. Sorry. Or it would be, you know, it would be engaging in a different way. And the goal of CareBot was much more to be like, this is who CareBot's designed for. This is who CareBot's supposed to be talking to, which were those facing immediate kinds of harms. But I mean, yes, it is. Those systems are functioning the way they're supposed to. One thing I think it's also kind of important to talk about that CareBot doesn't get into enough, and maybe another art chatbot I make will, which is that, you know, the belief of Facebook or any social media platform is that everyone should use it, right? That there's infinite scale. Hold on one sec. That there's infinite scale, that all of us should be on it. And it's not designed for all of us. And that is where the harm comes from. But I think it's important to highlight that that misnomer that, again, is presented by like capitalism and this demand to infinitely scale that everyone should be on it, and thus it's an experience for everyone, when it's not. It was designed for a very particular group of people. And that's also, I think, what CareBot is inherently trying to sort of talk about, is that this system, designed in a very singular way, has a plurality of groups on it. And a lot of those groups are facing harm, and the system has no good way to respond to that harm. So this weird little chatbot now is written, you know, in the language of technology, trying to sort of confront that. And I think that's also something that has to be included in this conversation, and that's the way I think of it in like a human rights context, is we're on these platforms and we need safety and we need policies that work for us and tools that work for us, because we're told we're supposed to be here, or rather we are here. And the systems have to now be augmented and redesigned for us that are here. And there's this intense fight, right? This intense push and pull between those that are in charge and us who are on them to try to change those systems. And I think that also has to really be talked about, which is like, we're here and your tools are harming us. And there's nowhere else we can really kind of go at this moment because so many other of our communities are on here. So why are they harming us?
Thank you for that. I want to pitch one of the questions that came in from the audience to all of you. So this is from Heather. I would love to hear more about how you approach the financial aspects of these projects, as there are monetary costs to hosting websites, developing platforms, etc. Have you received grants or donations to offset them in addition to volunteer labor? Based on my own work, I'm torn between absolutely valuing unpaid labor, wanting to be able to support it as much as we can, especially for those who historically are under-supported, while also not being limited by funding. As Sara mentioned, it's hard to ask for help in the context of knowing we are all, especially right now, often overworked and under-supported.
Just to address from Virtual Care Lab, and I think that's such an amazing question. We do have some funds. Some of it comes from things like micro-residencies that we've done. Sometimes it's from, if we post a public gathering on With Friends, people like make donations when they sign up and things like that. Although everything we do is sliding scale participation. So a lot of those funds previously we sent back to the artists who, hosted them, but we've also just had it, on the list of things to work out with our collective. How do we think about money? Can we create a policy for this? Because the reality is that we haven't been working with funds at like such a large scale that, we have any real rules about it. And we haven't sat down and like defined that with all of the people who are involved in a way that feels like fairly agreed upon. And so right now we just have some actual like project funds kind of sitting around. And we're like, well, we want to do things with this, and we want to be able to find greater funding as well, because it is an enabling force, right? And that's powerful. But to not use it in a way that reinforces like a scarcity mindset or values different people or different kinds of work at different levels, and kind of reinforces a lot of ingrained ways of valuing people, right? I think that's really important to us to determine, and why we haven't resolved that yet. And then to the volunteer labor piece of this, right? I think something that this is something that, I've definitely learned a lot about over the past year, just personally. And I think Alice, you probably too, right? Is that asking for help question. And so much of our practice is about accepting that people have different capacities, but really also allowing people to care and contribute and learn and things. And it's so easy to forget when everything has to be kind of like labeled with a dollar number, right? That people like to give and care and collaborate and do things together. And when it's done in an equal way that people feel valued and listened to and like they contributed or learned something, that's really great and beautiful. But it's really easy to let that slide into undervaluing work, or sort of like handing out volunteer appreciation tote bags once a year or something and being like, we love you, you're so meaningful. And it stops there, right? And some of these things don't necessarily lend themselves to scaling up a business in a human way, or to saying like, oh, we have to just really move quickly so everybody's got to put in lots of work. At times that can maybe inspire people, but really allowing that space to, I think our favorite phrase sometimes is show up any way you can, and to accept that like if you're running on care and volunteerism and kind of different levels of capacity, sometimes the person who can send the newsletter or who has said, I want to do this piece, isn't going to be able to do that exactly the same time every week. So it's a little bit of balancing those things between the acceptance and also, I think, the inspiration that comes from like being able to make things together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, this is an important and tricky question. I think for Cyberfeminism Index as a project in its two forms, the website and book has gotten different types of grant funding. I'm also part of an academic institution, so there's also research funding attached to these things. I think if you have access to these larger resources, it also becomes tricky because essentially I pay out everyone that's been part of this project, but except myself. So this is also like a funny balance where you're kind of funneling in funds and it's going outward. I often think though that in this time, people lean towards developing new initiatives when in fact there are so many existing things that could actually use support or maintenance and that kind of care. And a lot of the projects that we've discussed today are really based on like an oath of maintenance by like a core team. So whenever anyone is trying to develop something new, I do often encourage them to kind of do some sort of survey and see like what are the people in your area or in that field that are doing something similar that perhaps that you can contribute to or broaden in some way. Or if there's a way to kind of merge different collectives, because I do think that there is solidarity in numbers and you don't necessarily have to be like the founder, perhaps. Less a question about money, but definitely about labor.
And just to sort of piggyback off that, Mindy, but everyone, those are great points, but that's also something I recommend students do quite frequently, which is like, can you contribute to a pre-existing project? If your idea is somewhat similar, is there a way you can help with that or embellish that? Why replicate work that's already being done unless it really needs to be done in a different way? But can you work with that group? I also think for me, I'm probably in a similar place a little bit as Mindy. I'm like I teach in different institutions, but I'm not necessarily like a core part of an academic institution. But I am a part of like I run my own little CSO lab. We have fiscal sponsorship through another nonprofit. For me, what often ends up happening, it all depends upon the project. I have a much harder time figuring out like bigger arts funding. I have a much easier time figuring out human rights funding. And so for things like CareBot, I was really lucky that my collaborator, Alex, was willing to work for almost no money. And he's also a friend of mine. This happened to be a topic he was interested in. We went to like turn it into a bigger art project. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, the funding we get approached for is often people being like, what if you made the model better? I really did understand trauma more. And we're like, that's not the point of the project. And so we're in like a very weird position where like the project is unfundable in its current sort of stance. But you know, what I end up doing, I think sort of similar to Mindy, is there are like other things I write grants for, and then that funding that goes towards myself then ends up going outwards. Or if I get a grant or like an arts residency on a project, like with my other project, Feminist Data Set, that funds other people to help work on it with me. And then what I'm actually funded by is like the human rights research that I do. And so it's this weird kind of way where like my time is kind of stretched. I have thought about doing different things like Patreon. I don't know if y'all on the panel have thought of that, but I also feel strange sort of asking people to do that for me, unless it's towards like a very certain thing. One thing I have thought about now that I'm a part of a nonprofit is things like Open Collective and maybe listing all the different things that my lab provides and all the work that I do. So it's much more sort of explicitly seen as like, if you fund us at this amount, this is the amount of hours that can go towards digital security training for those facing online harassment, or this can go towards this research project we're working on, or it goes towards the maintenance of this other project. And I know you can do that with Patreon, but I've really struggled with that of should I ask my community or others to fund this? But then I think of all the things I fund on Patreon and all the Substacks and newsletters I read that I really enjoy. But I don't know, it's a very strange dance, but I often find myself like paying myself last and then taking freelance gigs to make sure like my bills are paid, but I can also do the projects I want to do.
Yeah, this definitely resonates on our end too, Caroline. And I think, yeah, we're noticing that actually there's so much funding. There's like so much resources flowing toward pro Web3, like pro blockchain, et cetera, right? Like you can totally, if you want to do a project that is like, throw criticality out the window, we're going to just do this and we're going to endorse like, this next wave of technology. Like there's so much funding for that. And then meanwhile, if we want to have the space that is less defined by that sort of linearity and more so are like, we want to hold space to think about this together and to slow down and to, redefine things and to, observe the runes and actually check in on whether, what we should be doing with each other at all. It's so much harder. And so I think this just like is an acknowledgement that there is such a lack and a need for funding for projects like this. And sometimes I think about like, I chat with friends and colleagues who are, thinking about like, are there certain like sources of money to take to be able to siphon that like into, then a different framing of like, and then now that we have that money, we're going to do something productive with it. And we haven't figured out that equation yet for Virtual Care Lab, but I think it's just, an ongoing conversation about like how to do this at all, given the really tenuous like landscape that's there right now of like what is incentivized and what isn't.
I'm going to pick up on a thread that's related to all of this, but a slightly different direction. And I'm thinking about the focus on intimacy and gathering and humanness and personhood and acknowledging the person and the self, and how that relates to online and avatar identities in the kinds of spaces that we're creating now. And some of that has to do with us all being on Zoom and what we're doing here on Zoom and who we are and how we're performing ourselves here. But I'm also thinking about the ways in which in the olden days of the web, anonymity became the surefire way for people to be mean to you. And then over time, it's become totally fine for you to inhabit your full online self and be that mean person with whatever authentic self is out there. This is kind of erosion of even the sense of restraint. And so how much of the work that we're doing now is the work of trying to rehumanize the virtual spaces? And are there things that we could be doing that we aren't yet doing, or that we're learning even from our time over the last couple of years, say?
Maybe we can chat a little bit from the Virtual Care Lab side. We've been really actively engaging with that. I think we've seen a lot of different reasons that people use anonymity, and everything from like, I'm really tired, and or like, I don't trust this, like, what is this community when I first step into it, and like I need time to sort out. But like I think underneath that, we're like understanding maybe there are certain needs that people have in order to engage, whether it's like with access or with understanding a space, and I think some of the thinking back through the gatherings and all of the ways that we've really experimented so far, some of the really generative moments have been to acknowledge what is not necessarily communicated. I think oftentimes we can really rely on like the space here as a proxy for shorthand for like just everything else that is that is happening in our lives, that is happening in our bodies and whatnot. And this is so far from all of that. It is pixel synced to voice, and even that, not everyone has access to all of that data that is streaming through. And so so I think from Virtual Care Lab, we've really just seeing how helpful it could be to to get up and to acknowledge our bodies, to take a moment, even if it's on Zoom, to, do a somatic grounding, or to like turn this off and someone, record a synchronized sound walk, and then we take that that sound bite, and then we all kind of walk around in our neighborhoods, and then we come back. I mean, there's so much other data that if we're intentional that we can invite in, that really helps us understand our own presence in the world in conjunction with our mediated networks and what is usually not communicated through here, as well as maybe then actually opening up like cracks to communicate in more full and rich ways that the technology maybe is not at its primary layer designing for. So those have been some fruitful things. Sarah, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up in a great way. We definitely incorporate a lot of those somatic practices, and just really thinking about, like, I think kind of guiding people to reflect on the ways that our virtual experiences and these different platforms we all use are not maybe built for a full human experience, is like the flip side of that. So on the positive side, we're like, what are the ways that we can, kind of promote thinking about this and becoming aware of our soundscapes, or communicating those things to each other. And also a little piece of that, I think, being empathy for other people's, somatic or emotional situations as well, right? Who maybe has a hard time with their computer audio or something. And like, how are everyone else in the virtual room doing, right? So meeting people where they are and really making that part of our shared practice, I think is really important. And then you also just kind of made me consider the way that in our Discord, right, or on Zoom, we definitely have a mix of people with pronounceable and unpronounceable handles, or like people are more or less active in the forum, so maybe have a better or not so strong idea of who they are. And so like really, like if people join our lab hour and they're kind of mute, camera off, I don't know how to, like, what your Discord handle means at all. We're still kind of like, hi, nice to see you. You can talk or you can not talk, and we're happy to have you here. And it's sort of like this two-way thing of like letting people know that their presence is seen and appreciated and welcome. But then also I think there's a little bit of a discomfort, right, around things that are unfamiliar or not immediately identifiable or placeable. And so like teaching people to accept that and kind of like give people the benefit of the doubt, which is so hard in this space where there is online harassment, right? Like we encounter all of these awful things all the time on the internet. But it kind of strikes me that accepting uncomfortable or sort of unplaceable presences is just something that we all have to learn how to come up against every day, physically or virtually, right?
And building trust over time in the long
Exactly.
run, so that we do have like a supportive foundational infrastructure if something does happen, like people know who to talk to, and that we can kind of hold that together, and someone is not alone in running into a situation like that.
This is all probably like sounds incredibly naive in the context of things like online harassment, but it is just kind of like, what are these baseline things that we care about enforcing as human values, right? Or as more than human values too, like trust and presence and, collectivity or solidarity or whatever it is. And understanding that the spaces and the format of our gatherings are often just technologically don't necessarily lend themselves to promoting those things. How can we really just double down on reminding people how to practice those values?
Thank you. We have time for probably one more question, so I want to present this to everyone. There's been conversation in the chat and among you all as well around maintenance being just as important as innovation. Thank you for that so much. As a computer scientist, I appreciate that. But I really want to also look at it. I see care from what you all have said across three different ways. So there's care as an afterthought in the tech space. There's also care not being quantified and valued properly, like things like efficiency and scalability, et cetera. But there's also this idea of not caring as an integral part of success in computing, specifically for the creators under this tech bro culture, and then also even in the consumer. So if we look at what's happening, for example, with the metaverse and the assault of women in the metaverse, we see that rewarding bad behavior happens across the development environments and the industry, from creators to consumers. So how can we, as academics and as professionals, better incorporate care and all of the work that you are doing in our classrooms, in our environments, so that we can start to create the change that you all are pushing and creating space for?
Thank you so much for asking that question. This is like not directed necessarily at like any particular student, but one of the things I get my students to think about is, are you the person to be solving this? And why is there a solution involved? So are you the one to even be tackling this topic? And how can you sort of make a case that you really are the person to be doing that? And then another thing I try to get students in particular, and I think all tech people could think about, is I think of like time, feasibility, and cost, and then maintenance in terms of anything you're building. So like, you know, if you're helping fill in what looks like a gap, which is fantastic, like we need more, you know, plumbers instead of rock stars. Do you also have really the time to fix or build whatever needs to be built in that gap, right? So if you do have the time, that's great. You know, what is the cost or impact of that? And that can be the cost of your time away from something else. It's not even necessarily a numerical or monetary cost. The feasibility is like, can you build it in the way it should be built or needs to be built? And then also we can ask much deeper questions around, how are you determining how to build it? How do you know that's the right way? Are you taking this very like global north, white male view on it? And the answer shouldn't be open source and volunteers, because that has all sorts of other problems, but maybe that is the answer that works for you. And then the last thing is like maintenance. Is that built into your plan of feasibility? Like what happens if your tool isn't updated and it's filling in this gap? And then what are all the sort of harms from that? And I think your question was touching on that a lot, but that's one of the things I'm trying to get sort of anyone, like when I'm engaging with them in a project, of thinking about, you know, what happens if you can't sort of like patch and update and it starts to like deprecate and it's old, right? What happens to all the things built on top of it? And then it's not really much of a solution. It's not really much of a band-aid or a help, is it? And it's another sort of abandoned sort of piece of craft out on the internet. And that can have as much problem as not. And I think, and that's also something I try to get human rights funders to think about, is why are you funding a new thing and why aren't you funding maintenance of a pre-existing thing? And I think this is a problem very much that funders need to be held accountable for, as to why are they asking for new projects, not continuations of projects? Why not fund follow-up research? Or if you funded a really big study 3 or 4 years later, go back and say, do you want to do it again? You know, here's money to do it again. Like, what did you learn? What changed? I know some funders are thinking about this, like the Ford Foundation has their digital infrastructure grant, and part of it is like really geared towards maintenance. But like that should be I think a big part of where funding comes from. And that can also be branched out even into the arts. Why must it be a new thing, a new intervention? Like there's a tyranny of toolkits out there. And I myself are responsible for a chunk of them as well. Get funded to make so many toolkits, but like, why are those things, and why not updates to pre-existing things, updates to pre-existing software? Like there's such an allergy to that I think really needs to be tackled, alongside of us asking really deep questions of, do we have the bandwidth to update even without payment for the next however long this project's in existence? That could be your entire life. Do you have 50 years in you to continually update a project? I think that can be a very daunting question for people, but I think that's kind of the seriousness maybe in terms of approaching any project, regardless of what it's looking at. And I think we can start asking those questions. We can then also start asking these other questions of, are we the ones to be involved in this domain, or do we need to bring in money to bring in actual experts. And I think about this in particular with Facebook of like, should you be the ones really trying to tackle online harassment, or should you actually collaborate with people that have a background in that sort of have the care to be able to handle that in that example?
Thank you. You have a couple, maybe like 1 or 2 minutes, if anyone else wanted to chime in.
I'll quickly chime in. Sorry, my allergies are, I feel like it's spring now. I'm excited. One thing that also came to mind when thinking about care is this idea that it shouldn't necessarily be like a hierarchical enforcement of what we consider to be like a code of conduct or some sort of like a communal norm. Something I learned from the School for Poetic Computation is called a group agreement, where before any event or semester, let's say, that all the members in the room have a conversation around value alignment, because a code of conduct kind of implies that people have the same ethical background when that's not necessarily true. So group agreement, then you kind of move through these translation errors and create a set of rules that will be reinforced or maintained by all members of the group, teacher, student, TA, etc. This also leaves space for those rules to change over time. So maybe it's like, oh, we actually feel like this rule, which we set on day one, doesn't apply with this dynamic, and it has time to evolve. So I also like this idea of like a communal group reinforcement of what the dynamic of a space is, rather than us clicking through some long gray legal text and then getting access to a platform. So I kind of wonder how to distribute that kind of maintenance as well.
So I know that we're at 1 o'clock and I want to make sure to respect everyone's time. I am so deeply grateful for this conversation. I could keep at it all day long. You all have really, I think, gotten right at the heart of some of the central questions that we've been wrestling with, and helped me to think about them in really new and very generative ways. I know that Nicki's just been wrapping up a big NSF grant, and all of the discussion about funding and innovation over maintenance, it reminds me about that so often when we go to get funding for things, they're like, how's this going to move the needle, and who's the individual rock star who's going to be at the front of this project? And so it's just been this has just been an incredibly helpful conversation, and I am looking forward to continuing it. One place you can continue it is that we're, Tanya and I are organizing a conference. It's going to be May 13th and 14th. It also will be remote and through a platform called Kiko Chat that allows for a lot of exchange, we hope, and conversation. And we hope that people will come there. If you aren't on our mailing list, please put your email in the chat if you'd like to know more about the conference or anything else. And just thank you so much to these wonderful artists and our 2 moderators who just did a really fantastic job. I thank you. This was really great. And have a wonderful day, everyone.